Hey gardeners, it is mid-December, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to take cutting wood from your fig trees, how to store that cutting wood, and also how to prune your fig trees up. This video was actually requested from one of my subscribers, John. So John, this video is for you. Hopefully this will help a lot of you out there who have fig trees. So I wouldn't typically cover this at this time of the year. Generally it isn't until the very end of December or early January that we see our fig trees hit dormancy, where we can do these things, take cutting wood, and also prune our trees. This year's a little bit different in that we did get that cold set in early. Typically we do not get frost dates in fall, and we've already seen several. If taking cutting wood to try to root or graft, you definitely don't want to take that cutting wood until the wood from the tree is completely dormant. And we can tell that by the fact that it no longer bleeds out sap or latex. Also, your trees will show signs by not having any leaves on them anymore. They should be completely dropped of leaves, and the fruit is not going to be ripening anymore. Also, you don't want to prune your trees until they've hit dormancy, and especially here where I'm going to be taking off anywhere between 60 and 70% of the year's growth. I definitely want that tree dormant before I go ahead and take that much off the tree. So we're going to start out by taking cutting wood, so I'll take you through those steps. You need a few basic tools in order to take scion wood. I like to have a ruler just to help me know the length, especially if you're going to be selling or trading cutting wood. You want to definitely adhere to kind of a minimum standard for the length of a cutting, so a ruler helps in that purpose. I like to also have a cup ready to put the cuttings in once I harvest them, filled with some water, that's also labeled. This way, when you're taking cutting wood, especially if you're dealing with different varieties, you're not going to mix them up in transport. So I always recommend having a bin or some kind of mechanism to be able to label and keep track of the varieties that you are harvesting. Purple water also helps hydrate the cutting while I'm working and retrieving other cuttings. You'll need a way to prune off the wood from the tree. Simple bypass pruners work very well when you're dealing with small diameter cuttings, something that's about pencil thickness. These are great for the job. Make sure they're sterilized and sharp. When dealing with larger diameter branches, I like to use a pruning saw. This one's a little intense. You definitely don't need something this big. But what I like with pruning saws is it doesn't crush the wood. It makes a very nice clean cut. Finally, before you cut into that tree, whether it be the bypass pruners or a saw, you're going to want to sterilize that instrument. And also when you go from tree to tree. I find the spray bottle to be the most convenient. You can just spray down your tools very quickly. When selecting your cutting wood, it is helpful to know what the purpose is of that wood if you're going to be grafting or rooting. For grafting, I tend to like thinner scion pieces, something like this, pencil thickness. That gives me a lot of different grafting approaches. If you have a thick cutting, it limits the types of grafts you can do. Having also experienced rooting fig cuttings, I tend to like a thicker diameter piece for that effort. And that's generally because the thicker the wood, the older, the more energy it's got. The next consideration is making sure that the cutting wood that you harvest is lignified. The bark is lignified. What I mean by that is bark should be brown. It should be hardened off wood. You will have some bend to the wood because fig wood is fairly malleable. It does bend, even wood that's fully hardened off. But you shouldn't see green on the bark, and it shouldn't be super flexible. So understanding what lignified wood is, we can go ahead and take our scion wood. So the minimum criteria for myself and for many is to cut a piece that's at least 6 inches long and has at least 3 buds. Now each fig variety is going to have buds spaced a little differently. This Chicago Hardy happens to have buds that are closely spaced, so we're going to have a lot more than 3 buds. Given this branch is small in diameter, I'm going to go ahead and use the bypass pruners, and I'm going to use my ruler to Just see where 6 inches comes up, so we can see it's right here. I don't want to cut through that bud, so I'm going to cut right in the middle between the 2 buds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 9 nodes on the 7-inch cutting. From here, I'm going to go ahead and stick this into the cup of water that's labeled with this variety. Here we have an example of a thicker branch. This is going to be more suitable for rooting and cutting. Same rules apply. We still want about a 6-inch piece at a minimum and 3 buds. Okay, on size, looking for 6 inches at a minimum. It's going to be about 7.5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and cut right between these buds. That'll still give us 1, 2, 3. See, with these thicker cuttings, they tend to have more spaced out buds. Alright, there's our piece. You can see our 3 nodes. Nice clean cut. I do recommend that if you are going to use a pruning saw, go ahead and use one of those fine tooth variations. You don't want something coarse because it can really tear at the top as you make your final cut, and you don't want the bark getting split off or splintered. You want nice clean cut on both sides. Okay, we're inside now. I'm gonna go ahead and show you how I clean cuttings or prepare them for storage. Here we have our 2 Chicago Hardy cuttings that we harvested. I'm gonna go ahead and put both of these into some soapy water. Just use some dish soap, just a drop, that's all you need. So with my fig trees, I regularly treat them with neem oil and also horticultural oil in the wintertime, so I don't really have any issues with bugs or fungus or anything like that. So I'm just going to give them a very surface cleaning by using a soft bristle brush and just some soapy water. So I'm going to just lightly scrub the cuttings with the brush. You don't need anything too intense. Honestly, for me, it's just more for aesthetics, especially if I'm selling a cutting. I just want it all cleaned up, you know, free of any dirt. I'll just rinse these off in some running water. After washing them, clearly you're going to want them to dry off. You don't want to store them when they're wet. That can lead to rot. So you can just go ahead and air dry them, especially if you live in a climate like Arizona. You're not going to have high humidity, so it's not like you got to leave these out real long. I find that they dry actually very quickly, just drying them by hand with the towel. Once dried, I like to take the extra step of sealing the ends. Some people will seal the ends in wax. I like to use buddy tape. This is a special grafting tape. It's more costly than Parafilm M. I like it a lot. I have much better success with it. It tends to keep the cuttings from drying out a lot better. It's easier to work with. So all I did was split it in half, because you can use one strip for one cutting. And then for each end, I'm going to just pull it and stretch it over the ends. And the point of this is that it's going to keep those ends from drying out. That's the first place in a cutting that loses moisture, and you don't want that to affect the freshness of your cutting. So you just seal both cut ends. So I'll do the same thing with the thicker one, except for that one I'm going to use a whole strip for both sides, just because we're having to cover a larger diameter opening. This would also be the time to go ahead and label your variety. Some people will use an oil-based white paint pen to write the name right directly on the wood. I won't do that here, but that's an option. I'll just go ahead and label the bag that I put these in. So the next step is that you want to seal this in cling wrap. That is definitely the best way to go for storage. It still allows some air exchange. It doesn't completely vacuum seal it, you know, where there's no ability for air to get out of there, which can cause gases to build up. This is organic material, so you want some breathability, but you definitely still want to wrap it to keep its freshness. So just one strip of cling wrap works well. And then this is where, you know, you can individually label these. Or if you're going to do a lot of one particular type of cutting, I wouldn't individually label them. I would just label the bag that they're going to go into. So we'll do the same thing for this cutting. It's kind of laid in the middle there. And we'll seal it up. Right. And then just to kind of hold these all together, I just use a Ziploc bag. Go ahead and put your cuttings in there. From there you can write the variety name right here on the bag, and the date even, if you want to know when you harvested it. And then as far as the bag, I don't completely seal it. I'll just close it maybe halfway, 2/3 of the way. So from there, all you have to do is stick your bag into the crisper drawer. So this will keep your cutting dormant. You know, it's in a controlled environment here in the fridge. In the crisper drawer, it has the right level of humidity. It's fine for a month, 2 months. I've had no issue storing cuttings this way for that period of time. But you have to keep in mind that this is living tissue, so it's going to degrade over time. There's only a finite amount of energy in a cutting, so you don't want that energy to go into storage. You want it to go into a process like grafting or rooting. So try to use your cutting, you know, within 2 months. Nothing to say that you can't go over 2 months, just realize that you can't go on forever and the cutting will start losing viability. Alright, so we're going to now talk pruning. Before I actually get into showing you how I'm going to prune this Chicago hardy fig tree, I want to talk to you a bit about why we're pruning and how much I'm going to take off this tree. So as you can see on this tree, that we have thick branches at the bottom that are more or less a gray color. Those were actually my cuts from last year, or the wood that I left on the prior year. So all the other branches you see, these numerous branches that are more in a brown color and thinner, that's all new growth that happened from March of this year. So in 6 months, this tree was able to produce around 40 new branches, fruiting branches. One thing you need to consider when you're growing fig trees is the variety that you're growing and your climate. There are some fig varieties that are known to be able to produce fruit on old wood, so they'd be able to fruit on this last season's growth. Chicago hardy is not among them. This variety can only fruit on new growth, on the new growth that will come out in spring. So when you live in a warm climate like ours, bear in mind that even if you have a variety that can fruit on old wood, because it gets so hot here so fast, that crop tends to drop in favor of main crop. So preserving the old wood is not something that you want to do as far as getting fruit from that standpoint. The other thing is you have to think about the energy of the tree, right? We're still giving it a finite amount of water and food. If I were to leave all 40 of these branches that came on this year and allow it to grow another at least 40 branches, you can see that that energy would be divided and you're not going to get good quality fruit. Your fruit will tend to be smaller and not as good tasting, right? Because the sugars can't develop when your tree is trying to support so much fruit. So even though these branches aren't capable of fruiting themselves, if you leave them, they will turn into scaffold limbs, and you'll get limbs coming out of each of these nodes that will try to produce fruit. So we definitely don't want to overload this tree with too much fruit. We definitely want to thin out these branches so that we can support a reasonable amount of fruit on this tree. The last aspect of why I'm pruning is for size. I'm growing this in a backyard culture. I happen to have a bigger yard than most, but a lot of you out there are growing in, you know, 6,000 square foot lot. You don't have the space to allow your backyard trees to get huge, nor would you want to as far as from a harvesting standpoint. Again, if I left all this, my fruit would tend to be up here, out of range of picking. The birds would be able to get most of the fruit, but I wouldn't be able to. So I want to control this for size. I want to keep my fruit right here, right where I can reach it. Live in a warm climate, you know, you're in zone 9B, whether you garden in Florida, Texas, Las Vegas, Southern California, we're going to get a ton of growth out of your fig trees. Fig trees excel in warm climates. They don't do that great in cooler climates. So you can expect in any given year, regardless of how you fertilize your trees, to see an enormous amount of growth. Because they grow so heavy and can put on 10 to 12 feet in a year, we need to keep them in check and cut them back pretty severely. So as you'll see in this video, I'm not going to just take off a little bit. I'm not going to just take off 20% of the growth. I'm going to take off around 50 to 60%, maybe even 70% of the growth on this tree. And the reason is, if I leave it too heavy, we're going to experience problems with size management, again with the fruit management, and crowding. You'll start to see your fruit's not going to develop its sugars because it's shaded out by too much foliage. So hopefully all that makes sense. If you do have questions about it, let me know. I'm going to jump into now the actual pruning of this tree. On pruning, this is going to be my main tool of choice. I will use the bypass pruners when I want to just head back a small branch, but a lot of these I'm going to make some big cuts on this tree, so I need something for the job. I do recommend you wear some eye protection. Given that these branches are bare, it's pretty easy for them to poke you in the eye. On my first cut, I'm going to actually take out this middle branch here. I'm cutting at an angle. As you can see there, you want to cut it in downward angles so that if you've got rain, it's not going to sit on there, it's going to run off. As I'm looking at the tree, I'm noticing that I've got some lower branches. This is a personal preference thing. Some people like multi-trunk trees. I don't. The other thing I'm going to do is just clear out any of those low hanging branches. I'm going to be taking this branch out too. I want to give a little bit of space in between those two. This is going to be my new scaffold. It's going to replace this. Alright, so that's our end result. And yes, I did take a lot off. We've left the essential framework or the old scaffolds from prior years. You can see that gray wood still remains. I've got 4 of those coming out there. Beyond that, I've left new season's wood. So that secondary branching here couple branches, typically off each of the main scaffolds. And those are cut back to a minimum of 2 nodes. Some of these have up to 5 nodes on them, so each of those branches will produce more wood, you know, new season's growth next spring. So take a quick look at the carnage pile here. So this is all what I trimmed off. And I know I'll probably get questions about this. Am I keeping these for cuttings? This is Chicago Hardy. This is a very easy to get fig tree. So I'm not offering cuttings of this variety. These are actually going to end up going into my chipper to make wood mulch. But certainly if you're going to be trimming up your fig trees, you know, you could take a pile like this and definitely cut off a lot of wood to make cuttings from and sell or give away to friends. You could try propagating more trees if you want to plant some more on your own property. Lots of things to do with it. I have more trees than I need right now, so no need for me to propagate more. Hopefully this has helped. Let me know if you have questions in the comments.